The story of Luke Skywalker is the centerpiece of the entire Star Wars saga and timeline. Everything before leads up to it, and everything after is affected by it. In some way, all of the spirits of the past held their breath as Luke blew up the Death Star, and then went to face down his father and the Emperor. It was the ultimate climax between everything the Sith had achieved and everything the Jedi had become, all wrapped into one desperate fight for the soul of a man and for the soul of the Force. And yet, it's amazing just how far Luke got on the minimal amount of training that he had. Obi-Wan and Yoda did their best with the time they had with him, but Luke was still woefully unprepared to face the might of Vader and the Emperor. But what if that were changed by someone who was intimately familiar with both the Jedi and the Sith? What if one of the most powerful Jedi to ever live came back from the dead to train Luke Skywalker? What if instead of Yoda and Obi-Wan, what if Luke were trained by Revan? Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome to the archives. If you've joined us today, then you've arrived for something very special. Our seers looked into one of the gates into the world between worlds to view a hypothetical future, and in today's holocron, they have documented what they saw. A quick side note before we begin though, I'm currently looking to bring on an editor for the channel. This is for someone who genuinely understands Star Wars lore, long-form storytelling, and how to elevate videos beyond basic edits and cuts. These are deep dive videos, so pacing, atmosphere, and knowing when to let moments breathe really matters. If this sounds like something you're interested in, I've put more details in the description down below about what exactly I'm looking for and how to apply. I'm excited to see what you guys can do. But now, the holocron opens. Let us begin. Luke, you will go to the Dagobah system. There you will learn from Yoda, the Jedi Master who instructed me. Those words echo in Luke's thoughts as he pulls his X-Wing from the surface of Hoth. The Imperial invasion has concluded, but rather than join Han, Leia, and Chewbacca on the Falcon, Luke has left separately with his own mission in mind. Following Ben Kenobi's direction, Luke plugs in the coordinates for Dagobah and enters hyperspace. However, something else occurs instead. A strange influence would take over his ship, redirecting its course. Rather than stay in the outer rim of the southern portion of the galaxy, Luke found his X-Wing jetting off towards the northernmost quadrant. He would try and fail to bring himself back on course, or to even exit hyperspace. His ship, though, is simply not responding. Even R2-D2 cannot override the controls. When he finally emerges in real space, he finds himself at the planet of Dantooine. Luke had personally never been to this place, but he did know that at one point during the rebellion that they had set up a base here prior to locating on Yavin. Figuring it was an old bug in his X-Wing's computer, Luke lands for repairs, but upon touching down on the planet's surface, he is greeted by another otherworldly visage. Through his cockpit canopy, Luke sees a figure in the distance watching him. The figure was robed and hooded, transparent with a blue light. It had matched what he had seen on Hoth. Believing it was Ben again, Luke jumps out of the cockpit and runs over the grassy fields to reach the figure. But as soon as he gets there, it vanishes, reappearing some ways away. Luke follows him again, calling out to what he believes is Ben. But the closer he gets, the more the figure eludes him. It keeps moving away until it brings Luke to the overgrown ruins of a domed building. This had once been the Jedi Enclave used all the way back in the 3900s of BBY, a time that saw the Mandalorian Wars and the Jedi Civil War of Revan. The hooded figure walks inside, and once again, Luke follows. Within the ruins of the Enclave, Luke finally catches up to the Spectre. With its back turned, Luke still thinks it's Ben and begins to question him. But then, the phantasm turns around to reveal not the familiar, a wise face of Obi-Wan, but the intimidating mask of a Mandalorian. Now seeing the figure clearly, Luke is standing before an armor-clad warrior in Jedi robes, but with a heavy and a powerful presence in the Force. One that reminds Luke distinctly of Vader. Luke abruptly ignites his lightsaber, but the figure negligently flicks two fingers, sending the weapon flying out of Luke's hand and skittering across the ground. Finally, the being speaks. Luke Skywalker, your masters had other plans for you, but from the netherworld of the Force, I have felt a great disturbance. Long ago, the balance of the Force rested upon my shoulders, and now I sense that same responsibility in you, but to a far greater degree. You will be pivotal to the fate of the galaxy, and so I have come to intervene and prepare you for your destiny. I am Revan. Following this, Luke brings his X-Wing to the ruins of the Enclave and sets up camp within it. This whole time, the ghost of Revan would tell him the story of the Jedi and the Sith, explaining the enemy that Luke now found himself facing. Revan would tell him of his own past, how he had once been a Jedi himself, one who had righteous intentions but veered off of that path. How he was corrupted by a Sith Emperor, not unlike the one that now sat upon the throne of the galaxy. And then how he had become a Sith Lord himself, only to later return to the light and fight against his former friend Malachor. Luke would take all of this information in stride, wondering to himself silently why Ben hadn't mentioned this figure before. Luke barely knew anything about the Force itself at this point, much less the dichotomy of the light and the dark and the champions of both. Luke points out that this war has been raging on for thousands of years, but that in the past, Jedi and Sith were about equal in number and power. But now, the Jedi were gone. It was just him, and he barely knew how to wield the lightsaber competently at all. Ben Kenobi had been the only Jedi Luke had ever known, and he watched Vader cut him down with ease on the Death Star. Revan warns him to mind his feelings, to not allow the circumstances to sow fear and doubt within his mind. He gives him the size matters not lecture, but in Revan's own words. Revan explains the great potential that Luke has within him. Though Luke remains doubtful, he's eager to learn the ways of the Jedi. Luke of course asks about Yoda, the man that Ben had told him about, but Revan says that he will take care of all of it. That night, while Luke sleeps, Revan's ghost appears on Dagobah and communes with the old Grand Master, informing the old hermit what he has done. Yoda is extremely displeased that the son of Skywalker has been trained without his permission, and by a Jedi long dead no less. However, the ghost of Obi-Wan and the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn manifest, and for the first time in decades, a council meeting is held. While Obi-Wan and Yoda remain skeptical of Revan's teachings, Qui-Gon would advocate for him, stating that Revan had the knowledge to prepare Luke much faster than any of them possessed. Besides, if Luke is to have a master, it should be the one who has actually destroyed the Sith before. Begrudgingly, Kenobi and Yoda would come to an agreement, but the old Grand Master insists on meeting Luke eventually, and with that, young Skywalker's training would officially begin. Revan starts off with outlining exactly what the Force was, expanding upon the foundation laid by Obi-Wan. The ghost senses their time together will be brief. He could sense how far the war had come, but also how quickly it could transform. And so he will keep his lectures to a minimum, make them more like crash courses. Having grown up and trained in the very enclave that they were now standing in, Revan is familiar with what surrounds them. He's able to salvage the rusted equipment that still lingers behind. Using his ghostly powers in Machu Daru, Revan reactivates some training remotes and dueling dummies. Their first practices were about teaching Luke about how to invite the Force into your body, let it flow through you to enhance your actions. But instead of Yoda riding on Luke's shoulders, it was the ghost of Revan hovering around him as the Jedi Padawan battled through ancient training equipment. With the Galactic Civil War raging around them, Revan instructs him in the way of the Jedi, training him as he would a wartime Padawan. In the Old Republic, lessons in the Force would come packaged as intense physical trials, and so the same happens here with Luke. But unlike Yoda, who would tell Luke to keep his mind calm and passive, Revan teaches how to interact with these emotions properly, and even how to harness them for power. By the end of his life, Revan had come to the belief that passion was not as bad as the Jedi had always taught. When channeled directly, passion can give Jedi an edge without tipping them over to the dark side. One can use their attachments to supercharge their power in the Force with positive emotions, the way the Sith did with the negative. In Revan's life, these teachings were unfortunately never spread. Only things he pondered to himself in deep meditation. But now he has a student of his own, and he can finally begin a new Jedi teaching. Revan senses Luke's penchant for strong emotions, for ironclad bonds that he has formed with his friends, all traits that he has taken directly from his father Anakin. So the Padawan was the perfect being for Revan to test this theory on. Revan ensures that Luke's mind stays clear, but encourages him to allow the feelings of love and joy to rush and pass through him. Many times this came out as a touch of arrogance in Luke, but Revan was quick to punish it, to train that arrogance out of him. When he feels that Luke was good enough, Revan leads him to the old Rakatan ruins of Dantooine, the place where the star map was once held. He would then reactivate the ruins, using its traps as a makeshift obstacle course with an elevated difficulty. But the real prize of these vaults were the Rakatan Guardian droids. Revan himself had battled these same droids during his search for the star maps, and so he knew they would provide a significant challenge to his young Padawan. The Guardian droids have blasters, flamethrowers, and carbonite projectors. Luke would get a deadlier challenge in blaster deflection while also being forced to dodge the flames and avoid getting frozen in place by carbonite. But even after successfully evading their attacks, the droids had shield generators, so it was not easy to land a clean lightsaber strike. Being a former Sith Lord, Revan does not hold back in their combat training. Revan was not cruel by any means, but he knows what Luke is up against, and that they are short on time. Luke would fail a couple of times against the Guardian droids, forcing Revan's ghost to drag him out of the Rakatan ruins before he died. They would spend a couple of days learning how to more easily use telekinesis. At first, Luke thought that he would never get it down. The droids were too tough, and his injuries from them made each subsequent attempt all the more difficult. But Revan teaches him how to flush the pain from his body, to refresh himself with the Force using a recovery trance. This was a quintessential Jedi technique that Luke originally figured out for himself. But Revan, who was much more thorough than Yoda was, not because Yoda is a bad teacher, but because he simply took things much slower. Revan accelerates this curriculum though, knowing that Luke's potential would allow him to keep pace. This is a prodigy pushing a prodigy. With this intense training, Luke was unlocking his father's power within him and progressing at a breakneck pace. Despite his many failures, he is unwilling to relent. He would train day and night, using the recovery trance instead of sleep. This is something that a Jedi Knight Luke did in the EU novels extremely often. But here, Luke learned it early and uses it to rapidly progress his training and his abilities. Eventually, he manages to go back into the Rakatan ruins and defeat the Guardian droids. Almost a month has gone by, and Luke is now twice where he was at the end of his training with Yoda. He's confident in his abilities and ready to take on Vader. But Revan gives him a not so fast. There are still many things that he lacks, and one of them was experience with the dark side. If Luke were to face a Dark Lord, he needed to be aware of his enemy's power. Revan then instructs his apprentice to get in his X-Wing, and he gives him coordinates. Following them, Luke ends up in an asteroid field. At first he's confused, but he feels a chill run through his body. This place is potent in the dark side. Revan's ghostly voice echoes to Luke in his cockpit, telling him that this is what remains of a planet once known as Malachor 5. Revan proceeds to explain what had happened here. It was here where Revan unleashed the mass shadow generator, resulting in the world's devastation. The disturbance caused a wound in the Force to manifest, giving rise to 3 powerful Sith that destroyed most of the Jedi of this era. One of the Sith happened to be Revan's old master, Kreia, who then used a temple on Malachor 5 as the centerpiece for her scheme. Eventually, the cursed planet was destabilized and destroyed by Revan's friend Mitra Surik when the mass shadow generator was reactivated. The point of this field trip was to show Luke the dangers of the dark side. What happens when you use any means to destroy an enemy? Luke senses it and is heavily disturbed. The ordeal reminds him of when he saw the remains of Alderaan. Revan then instructs him to land on one of the asteroids. Some of them were still large enough to retain breathable atmospheres. Despite the destruction of the world, a few colonies still struggled to keep an existence in the planet's remains. But the specific asteroid that Luke would land on contained what is left of the Traius Academy. This was a temple where Darth Revan had once tortured Jedi to the dark side and had trained Sith assassins. It had been the place where Kreia met her ultimate fate. Luke could tell that Revan was urging him forward, but he felt his master's ghostly presence leave him. The Traius Academy is little more than crumbled walls shaping the foundation, but nonetheless filled with secrets. Luke follows moving shadows and hissing voices which lead him deeper inside until he finds the Traius core, which lay in the innermost sanctum and is still largely intact. In this horrific place, the air is thick with the darkness, and Luke would experience the same vision of Vader that he had in the dark side cave of Dagobah. Luke eventually emerges from the Traius Academy, with more questions than answers, and returns to Dantooine. Luke immediately tells Revan of the vision. He asks its meaning, but his master simply replies that it is a truth that he would need to discover on his own. Revan may be a Force ghost, having a larger view of things, but he was not omniscient, and at this point, he doesn't know that Vader is Luke's father. Revan believes that now would be a good time to properly teach Luke the ways of meditation, so that he may divine a meaning for his vision. Just like on Dagobah, Luke meditates and levitates objects around him, and during his meditation, he sees the city in the clouds, the suffering of his friends. Originally, Yoda discouraged Luke from following visions of the future, since the dark side clouds everything, and he had kept Luke on Dagobah. But Revan was different. Revan had learned to heed these warnings of the future, to use them to his advantage. He informs Luke of the same lesson he had once given Lord Scourge. The future is always in motion. The Force grants visions that show only one of many possible outcomes. The visions they receive are not certain, but can be used to inform their actions or give them direction for the present. Luke, eager to prevent his friends from suffering or dying, inquires of his master what action he should take. Revan responds in direct opposition to what Yoda would have said. Rather than telling him to ignore it, he tells him to follow it, to find the city in the clouds, to use his connection to his loved ones as power against the Sith. However, Revan tells Luke to focus only on saving his friends and escaping. He sternly warns his Padawan to not engage Lord Vader. Even after everything he has learned, he is still not ready for a confrontation with a Sith Lord. And privately, Revan has a foreboding about what would happen if Luke is alone with Vader. Taking his master's words to heart, Luke jumps in his X-Wing and speeds to Bespin. Along the way, Luke continues to practice his meditation techniques, and in the process, Revan decides to teach him something else, something to try once he arrives at Cloud City. By the time Luke arrives, the Millennium Falcon is already there. However, he beats them all to the carbon freezing chamber by only a few minutes. During hyperspace, Revan had decided to teach Luke the ability of Force concealment, an important technique that his Sith assassins often utilized. By cloaking his signature, he keeps himself from being detected prematurely by Vader. The Dark Lord is already escorting Han, Leia, Chewie, and 3PO to the chamber, so the Imperials don't have time to inform him that an X-Wing has just landed. Within the chamber, they prepare to freeze Han. But right at the last moment, Luke's blue lightsaber ignites, whirling from above, striking the chamber's control panel. Vader is completely caught off guard as Luke swings down from a cable and kicks over two stormtroopers. Manipulating his saber telekinetically, Luke directs it to cutting off Chewbacca's restraints to loose the Wookiee's fury. Calrissian, seeing an opportunity to redeem himself, frees both Han and Leia. They grab the fallen troopers' blasters, and a firefight begins. Boba Fett attempts to end the insurrection by targeting Luke, but is caught off guard when he finds himself fighting an enemy reminiscent of the Clone Wars Jedi. Luke deflects the blaster bolts with precision, and when Boba utilizes his flamethrower, the boy leaps over it as if he has done it 1,000 times over. The training with the Rakatan droids was making Fett's attack seem like a catwalk to Luke. Vader's plan has gone completely awry, but he doesn't actually move yet. Instead, he watches. He watches Luke with a complete and an utter fascination. How had he cloaked himself from his senses? Surely Kenobi hadn't taught him that. And the way he moved, unrefined, but graceful nonetheless. He wasn't swinging his saber with wild abandon, but deflecting bolts with precision. Each stroke of his lightsaber had an intended destination, and almost always landed. Luke and the rebels fight their way out of the carbon freezing chamber, and immediately afterwards, Vader instructs Boba Fett to use the facility's security systems to start closing the doors. He wanted to route the rebels towards himself. As they run through the halls, Han is relieved to not have become a wall decoration, and Lando apologizes for his actions, deciding to use his resources to fight the Empire. But as the doors begin to close off their pathway to the Falcon, Luke senses the presence of Lord Vader. Yet another blaster door shuts in their faces. One opens at the far end of the hall, revealing Vader standing there alone, his crimson lightsaber already ignited, reflecting off the clean white walls. Luke instructs R2 to override the door controls and to get it open, but then he steps forward, igniting his own lightsaber. He remembered his master's warning against engaging the Sith. However, things had changed. If they had a chance at leaving alive, he needed to distract Vader long enough for his friends to escape. Leia tries to protest, but R2 opens the door and Han pulls her along with them, leaving Luke alone with the Dark Lord. Vader steps up, denouncing his actions as brave, but ultimately pointless. The two cross blades, prodding at one another to test their defenses. At the moment, they're sizing each other up. Luke had seen Ben Kenobi fall to Vader's blade before, and Revan had continuously spoken of the danger of the Sith. A part of him knew deep down that he should have just taken the distraction and run, but the louder part of him desired to test himself, and possibly avenge his old teacher. Vader, on the other hand, was hoping to beat him into submission. He did not want to damage the Emperor's prize, but with the carbon freezing chamber now inoperable, he had to switch tactics. Of course he wanted to see what the boy was made of as well. If Luke were to become a tool for the Sith, a weapon that could be used to overthrow Sidious, Vader wanted to measure his power. Their fight is brief, but intense, and Vader is pleasantly surprised by the boy's speed and agility. Luke force pushes a sculpture into the hallway at Vader, but the Dark Lord returns it with greater power and precision, as the ancient sculpture crashes through a window. Vader proceeds to pull up objects and metal panels off of the walls and floor to hurl at Luke in a continuous assault. Luke is strong, but the young Jedi's defenses fail under the telekinetic barrage. He's only sent tumbling out of the window himself and landing down on the walkway. Vader pursues, and the two duel across the upper ramparts and walkways of Cloud City, progressively making their way to the docking bay. Vader tells himself that he must hold back significantly. He wants to goad Luke into using the dark side, to see what he is like when he is amped by emotion. But soon, he finds that he must put much more effort in than he has anticipated and is comfortable with. Luke's blade work is still inelegant, but it is effective, and his power in the Force was staggeringly high for someone of his experience level. We believe that just with the original Cloud City duel that Vader dominates, but Luke is holding himself up much better than he did in the original timeline. Revan would have taught Luke to wield the lightsaber like a warrior, not like a youngling. No shade to Yoda or Obi-Wan, but they trained him as if they had more time than they actually did, and this led Luke to using a hybridized blaster and lightsaber kit for a very long time. He wouldn't be a proper duelist until much later in the war, but this timeline is different. His crash course wartime Jedi training has made him a formidable opponent in any age. Several times Vader would be surprised by a sudden burst of speed and power from his son that forced him into a precarious defense. To Vader, the young Jedi that now stood before him was a night and day difference to the emotional boy that he had sensed on the Death Star. The fight eventually takes them to a landing pad that oversees a long drop into the gas giant of Bespin. Here, Vader ramps up his power and aggression. He has acknowledged that Luke is powerful, but he now needs to neutralize him. In the original Bespin duel, Luke landed a desperate blow on Vader's shoulder, thus causing the Dark Lord to cut loose for just a moment and to take the boy's hand. However, Luke doesn't lose his hand or Anakin's lightsaber in this version or this fight. He's much too agile. Not to mention the landing pad has a wider area, so he's not cornered against a railing. But in an effort to throw Luke off his balance, Vader pauses the duel and reveals the truth, that he is the boy's father. The boy is stunned and devastated, and Vader moves in to take advantage and disarm him. Unfortunately, this version of Luke was taught to draw on his emotions for power. This whole time he's been using his positive emotions, such as hope that his friends were escaping, and relief that he has saved them. But now, in the midst of a horrifying revelation, Luke is unable to differentiate the emotions that he's been drawing from. He screams and unleashes a mighty force wave that blows Vader back and destroys supports, destabilizing the platform. At that moment, the Falcon also arrives, lowering the boarding ramp. Luke quickly makes an escape as the platform begins to collapse. Vader is forced to save himself by leaping to safety as the landing pad cracks off of the facility and goes tumbling down into the cloudy abyss. By the time Vader gets back up, the ship is already leaving. The rest of the events of Empire Strikes Back plays out as they normally do, except this time Luke does not have to have his hand rebuilt. The Alliance rendezvous with the Mon Calamari fleet, and this version of Empire Strikes Back actually ends on a high note for the rebels. Now, because Han Solo is not frozen in carbonite, the rebellion doesn't have to waste precious time and resources to get back their commander. They can focus their efforts into building their stock, as well as recruiting more people and making real strikes against the Empire. Although Luke is happy about all of this, he's the only one not in high spirits. He feels lied to and betrayed by Ben. The ghost of Revan is able to manifest to him aboard the Mon Calamari cruiser, and coaches him through his negative emotions. He also admonishes his pupil for ignoring his instruction and facing Vader before he is ready. Luke accepts Revan's teachings and works towards not letting his negative emotions get the better of him. In fact, Revan would actually begin to gently walk him through using his frustration, not necessarily for using the dark side, but for finding the balance. Revan had hoped to bring Luke to this place all along, but it was much safer to start him in the light rather than confusing him with any of the gray. But now he had the perfect opportunity to teach Luke this new approach and acknowledge that the dark side did exist without allowing it to consume him. At this point, Luke is ready for answers, so he decides to complete Ben's instructions and go to Dagobah. If anyone can tell him about his father, it will be this Yoda. Luke crash lands in the swamp just like before, and encounters the former Grand Master. Yoda attempts to give Luke the same cocky old hermit routine, but he sees right through it. By now, Luke's ability in Force perception is incredibly keen, and he can perceive Yoda's star-like presence in the light. Yoda eventually drops the use once he's called out on it, but the Grandmaster dislikes the frustration with which he senses in Luke. Just as he thought, Revan had not fully trained the impatience out of the boy. After all, Revan himself had once been the very picture of impatience. However, unlike Revan and Anakin, Luke may have been impatient, but he was never disrespectful. Growing up with Owen, he was taught different standards, so when Yoda rebuked him for his attitude, Luke felt ashamed and simmered down. The two have a long conversation over root leaf stew and about Anakin. Obi-Wan's ghost also manifests here in an attempt to let Luke and him hash it out. Now that the truth has been exposed, Obi-Wan and Yoda tell Luke about his sister Leia. Eventually, Luke comes to understand why Obi-Wan had kept all these secrets, but it didn't change the emotional turmoil that he now felt. Luke is expected to destroy the Sith. That's what Revan has been training him specifically to do. But now he learns that one of them is now his very father. Luke thanks both of the Jedi Masters for their time, and departs Dagobah to return to the rebellion. This time, he lifts his own X-Wing out of the swamp himself. I don't believe that he'd stick around there for much more training. Anything Yoda could teach him, he may have also learned under Revan. Also, this scenario, it is Revan that is Luke's master, not anyone else, so we're going to have Revan continue his journey. Luke confides in his master about his revelation concerning his father, and asks him for advice. It is here where the ancient Jedi reveals the rest of his story. He tells Luke that he has seen many come back from the dark side, including himself. He had been brought back from the darkness due to his memory being completely wiped. But when he regained it, he had no desire to go back because of a woman that he loved, Bastila Shan. Revan himself had also convinced a dark Jedi by the name of Juhani to return to the light by talking her down as well. His own lover Bastila was tortured into Sithhood by Darth Malak, however, but because of the love that they shared, Revan was able to bring her back to the light, just as she had done for him. The lesson was ultimately that one thing that the dark side cannot stand up to is love. Luke takes the lesson to heart and continues to ponder as he trains. He eventually comes to forgive both Obi-Wan and Vader, and even pities the Dark Lord, seeing that he is a victim of a greater manipulation. During this time, Revan begins to teach his Padawan more advanced applications of the light, such as Force Heal, Force Freeze, as well as the art of interrupting other beings' ability to use the Force, all abilities that Revan himself knew and applied. Revan also begins to tiptoe Luke into acknowledging abilities of the dark side as well. Revan begins small, with the ability of Machudaru. Machudaru was originally a Sith-created technique of dominating technologies. It downloaded the information of how to use a piece of technology into the mind of the user, and it allowed them to bend it to their will. This was one of the few Sith abilities even certain Clone Wars Jedi were approved to learn. Later, Revan taught Luke how to peer into the minds of others, how to channel pain into power, rather than just numbing it over. But the most important ability Luke learns is to menace. Revan would tell Luke the story of how he had once tried and failed to defeat the Sith Emperor of his time, but what had helped him stay alive was his ability to absorb energy. This is where Revan actually informs Luke of Sith lightning, that it is more than likely that the Emperor of this day uses it as well. In the novelization for Return of the Jedi, it tells us that Luke briefly deflected some of Sidious's lightning with his hand, before ultimately becoming overwhelmed by it. So it's not out of Luke's capability to learn to menace with a proper master this time, one who he has trained with far longer than he ever trained with Kenobi or Yoda. Revan also begins to teach Luke the greater intricacies of lightsaber combat and its designed forms. He begins using his saber more in alliance missions, and becomes practically untouchable on the battlefield. Now more obviously presenting as a Jedi, Luke begins to inspire hope and courage in the rebellion. His new powers make his fame spread throughout the stars, even though Imperial propaganda attempts to make him out to be a charlatan or outright suppress news of Luke. His name becomes a cantina mention spoken in hushed tones. We also believe that Luke reveals the truth to Leia about their siblinghood and their shared parentage. They agree to keep it private for now, because having the children of Vader be prime leaders of the rebellion would create a massive scandal, one that they cannot afford, and he needed the alliance to remain unified. But the Sith have been making moves of their own. Vader has planted an agent in the rebellion, Shira Bree, who was originally intended to get Luke ostracized from the Alliance. But Luke is able to discern her true alignment in the Force much earlier here, and he exposes her to the Alliance leaders. Because of this, she is never shot down by him in a starfighter, and does not become Lady Lumaya. Amongst all of this growth, however, there is some heartbreak. As the year progresses, Luke notices that each time Revan appears to him, he is less and less solid. Soon, he stops appearing to Luke for hours on end, and will only appear to him for a few minutes at a time. Sometimes Revan didn't appear at all, but came only as a voice or a premonition. Luke inquires to Revan about what is going on, and the Master reveals that his time in the material plane is nearly over. He had used a tremendous amount of power and vast strength to remain manifested as Luke's Master, but now that strength is waning, and the well of energy is running dry. He had already become one with the Force once before, and so he was never meant to return in the first place. Luke is saddened to hear that his teacher will not be with him much longer, but he decides to make the most of their time together by learning as much as possible. Meanwhile, Sidious is infuriated at Vader's failure on Bespin, and learns through field reports that Luke Skywalker is now operating beyond the power of any Clone Wars Jedi. Luke is now officially a threat to the Sith, and Palpatine sends a few of his Emperor's hands to assassinate the Jedi. None of them ever return, however, and Vader continues to hunt for Luke, but the boy evades him at every turn. The year is now 4 ABY, and the Bothan spies return with news of the second Death Star. As soon as he hears of it, Luke feels a deep disturbance in the Force, a deep wrong. Having been trained by Revan to mind the future, Luke seeks out answers in meditation. Sidious was good at using the dark side to cloud his intentions, but Luke has experience in both sides of the Force this time, and is able to pierce the veil and divine that Endor is a trap. He tells Mon Mothma and Dodonna about what he has learned. The Alliance leaders trust the wisdom of a Jedi, but they point out that trap or not, they cannot let this opportunity pass them. The longer they wait, the closer the Empire gets to repeating a second Alderaan. Luke is concerned, communing with his master in private, and attempts to think of a way to take down the DS-2 with minimal loss of life. But then, gazing at Revan's ghostly image, Luke asks him about his mask. He had seen the same kind worn by Boba Fett many times, and always wondered what the connection was. Revan tells him all about the Mandalorians, their role in galactic history. Luke gets an idea, and wonders if the warrior race could be pursued to fight for the rebellion. Revan is dubious about Luke's ability to convince them to fight with the Jedi, but he agrees that it may be a good idea. But only if Luke can appeal to their sense of duty, strength, and honor. And to do that, he must be a symbol. Revan directs Luke to return to Yavin 4, to plunge into one of the temples. There he would find Revan's robes, his lightsaber, and his mask, all left behind after his last physical death in the year 3941 BBY. Luke finds them all, claiming the mask, but he also takes with him the lightsaber, desiring to put it in a place of honor for his master. Luke would take a journey to Mandalore, where he would find the Mandalorian people scattered, enslaved by the Empire. In Legends, the Mandalorians thought that siding with the Empire would be the best bet, but ended up selling too much of their land until they ended up merely as slaves. The remnants of their warrior class were now mercenaries, either acting as bounty hunters or performing strikes against the Empire. Luke locates the mercenaries, raising the mask of Revan high in the air. Though it has been thousands of years, tales of this particular Jedi have permeated through their culture as the only Jedi that they ever respected. This at least earns Luke an audience with their leader, where he explains his plan of them joining the Alliance. However, they are not yet convinced, and they need proof that Luke was strong enough to lead a successful mission against the Empire first. Luke had expected this, and knew that in order to impress Mandalorians, he had to meet their warrior culture. So the Jedi tells them if they wanted to know his strength, they only need ask Boba Fett. The Mandos take this challenge seriously, calling upon Boba. The bounty hunter arrives, all too eager to settle his score with Skywalker. During meditation in preparation for his match, Revan advises Luke to not use his Force abilities, as the Mandalorians will not respect him as a warrior if he does. Luke finds himself in a duel with Boba Fett in an arena pit with Mandalorians jeering and chanting around him. The fight is fierce and spectacular, with Boba putting Luke on the ropes. It's difficult to fight a man of Fett's caliber without his powers. Unfortunately, their battle would remain inconclusive, because at this moment, the Empire crashes the party. Imperial intelligence had informed the Mandalore garrison of Luke Skywalker's movements, and now stormtroopers flood the arena. Luke and Boba then find themselves fighting back to back instead of against one another. If it's a choice between the Empire and the Mandalorian clans, Fett is choosing his home. Luke and the Mandos clean up the first wave of stormtroopers, and Luke suggests that since they're all fighting the Empire anyway, they may as well take it as far as possible. What then proceeds is a week-long mission where Luke works to help liberate the Mandalorian slaves, to throw the yoke of the Empire off of the planet. In the process, he gains the allegiance of the Mandalorians, and begrudgingly, even the respect of Boba. But the victory train ends early, when Darth Vader personally arrives to Mandalore. Luke tells the Mandos that they all need to leave, to meet up with the Rebel Alliance. Luke can guarantee them passage if he turns himself in. But before doing this, Luke goes away by himself to commune with Revan one more time. By now, Revan no longer appears to him visibly, and even now, Luke can only faintly hear the apparition's voice. Revan tells Luke that this is the last time he will be able to speak to him. He has taught him everything he can to prepare him for his destiny. Only one goal remains now: redeem Vader, destroy the Emperor, and restore peace to the galaxy. He instructs Luke to remember everything he has learned, work for the light, fear not the dark, and remain in the balance. As Revan's echoing voice fades away, his very last act is to pronounce Luke Skywalker a Jedi Knight. Following this, just like on Endor in the original timeline, Luke submits to the Imperials without a fight and is taken in by Lord Vader. Immediately, the Dark Lord senses just how powerful his son has become. Aboard the Executor Super Star Destroyer, Vader has a private conversation with Luke, the same one they had on Endor. But this time, Vader's not looking at Luke's new lightsaber, but Anakin's old one. He examines Revan's lightsaber as well, the one Luke was carrying on him all this time. He doesn't recognize it, but assumes that Luke has constructed it. Privately, he's surprised that the saber contains a purple blade. The young Jedi chooses not to divulge the information about Revan, and keeps their conversation strictly about his and Vader's relationship. Ultimately, their conversation concludes as it originally does, with Luke having gotten into his father's head, stoking the flames of inner conflict. They travel to Endor, and Luke is taken up to finally meet the Emperor in person. Things once again follow the events of Return of the Jedi, but with a slight change. Luke is fully calm, in complete assurance. Palpatine's goadings do nothing to sway him, and he isn't worried or blindsided by Sidious's trap. The Rebel Alliance soon arrives as expected, and the fleet engages the Death Star. But this time, they're aided by the Mandalorians as well. The landing party consists of not only Han, Leia, Chewie, and Rebel soldiers, but also Boba Fett and a strike team of Mandalorian warriors. The Ewoks don't play a role in this version of the Battle of Endor. They're replaced by the elite Mando commandos. The surface battle is a wash, with the Alliance totally steamrolling the Empire and destroying the shield generator. Things are not going according to Sidious's plan, and Luke goads about already knowing the Emperor's trap. Sidious is enraged, but he still holds his cards. He reveals the one thing that Luke did not know: the Death Star is operational. As the super laser begins blasting away at the Rebel fleet, Luke is feeling a bit of pressure now. He just hopes that the Falcon can make it inside in order to destroy the reactor. Vader then presents Palpatine with the lightsaber that Luke has been carrying with him. Sidious recognizes the saber of Anakin. He finds it to be amusing. He tells Luke about how this same weapon had once been used to kill, to butcher younglings. It was the weapon of a murderer, a traitor, just as Luke will soon be when he joins them. Skywalker gets frustrated, but holding firm, continues on the path of a Jedi. That is, until Sidious recognizes the second lightsaber in Luke's collection. Unlike Vader, Palpatine recognizes the blade instantly, the lightsaber of Revan. The Emperor is greatly disturbed by it, and demands to know how and why Luke is in possession of such a saber. The Jedi Knight answers simply, "It is the weapon of my master." At this point, Sidious's rage has boiled over. It was one thing for the son of Skywalker to exist and to have gotten this far, but now he claims to be a Revanite. The Emperor, of course, doesn't understand that Luke is legitimately trained by Revan himself. Instead, Sidious deduces that he has joined the Revanite cult. To Sidious, this explains the affiliation with the Mandos, but it is also confirmed to Sidious that Luke would never serve him so long as he worshipped Revan. Sidious tells Luke that Revan was wishy-washy and could never remain in power because he didn't stick to one side of the Force, never showing full allegiance or understanding. He instructs Lord Vader to show Luke the true meaning of the dark side. Vader ignites his saber, and Luke whirls around to summon both of Revan's lightsabers. He blocks Vader's strike with one, and attempts to stab at Sidious with the other. But the Emperor is too fast. He blasts Revan's saber out of Luke's hand with a torrent of Force lightning. But this is when Vader steps in. Originally, he was moved by seeing his son tortured, and did not want this only chance of saving a good future to be taken by Sidious again. But in this timeline, Luke isn't being tortured. Luke is more of a threat, and he is not being moved by his son's agonizing plight. Rather, something different happens in Vader's mind. He sees an opportunity to overthrow Sidious. Taking Anakin's lightsaber off of the ground, Vader takes a swing at Sidious. The Emperor sees this coming, and breaks off his Force lightning stream in order to defend himself. Luke takes a moment to recover. He is surprised to see Vader now fighting against the Emperor. He himself retrieves Revan's purple lightsaber, and engages the Dark Lord of the Sith right alongside his father. The battle is hard fought, but Luke and Vader's combined power proves to be more than enough for Sidious. Not to mention, Luke's expanded knowledge of the Force techniques allows him to not only keep himself in the fight, but keep Vader safe from the worst parts of Palpatine's abilities. In the end, as it should be by the will of the Force, Vader lands the final blow on Sidious. But with the Emperor dead, Vader invites Luke to join him, to rule the galaxy as father and son. Now they can take the yoke of oppression off of the galaxy, make things the way they wanted them to be. But Luke refuses. He senses that while Vader is in conflict, he still belongs to the dark side as of now. Like we said, in this timeline, Luke was not facing a life or death situation that required Anakin's selfless intervention. It had been that action which brought Vader back to the light. But here, things are different. Vader only stepped in because he saw an opening for his own selfish ambition. But that's not to say that there isn't still a chance to redeem him. As the Death Star shakes from the battle around them, Luke encourages his father to come with him. The station was going to be destroyed soon, and if Vader submitted to the Alliance, he could get a fair trial. The Dark Lord is not keen on this idea, and he moves to attack his son yet again, now having nothing left to lose. But Luke is quicker, and in 2 moves, he repeats Obi-Wan's maneuver from Mustafar and takes Vader's right arm and both of his knees. But Luke refuses to deliver the killing blow. Luke drags the incapacitated Vader from the Death Star right as it begins to explode. Back on Endor, the Mandalorians show the rebels how to have a good victory party, and the galaxy celebrates the death of Sidious. But for Luke, the ending is a little different. Rather than communing with the Force Ghosts on Endor, Luke spends much of the ensuing months personally guarding the Dark Lord, waiting until the rebellion is reorganized into the New Republic. Once a proper government is installed, Luke takes Vader to be tried in a court of law. Vader is given a special prison to sit out the remainder of his days, but his son visits him regularly. It takes a long time, but eventually, Anakin does come around. Luke, having experience in contacting Force Ghosts, is able to get Ben Kenobi to manifest to his former student. Finally, Anakin and Obi-Wan reconcile. Luke begins his new Jedi Praxium on the world of Dantooine instead of Yavin, rebuilding the old enclave where Revan once trained him. And here, Luke immortalizes his master by placing his mask and his lightsaber on a pedestal for all to see. Luke would carry on Revan's memory by spreading his teachings about using love, joy to fuel the powers of the light, spawning a generation of Jedi more powerful than any who came before. And this is where our story ends. This, my friends, is what we believe would happen if Luke were to be trained by the spirit of Revan. Although we sort of end up in a similar place, everything turns out much better in this timeline. Luke is able to keep his hand, his father's lightsaber, to keep Han from being frozen in carbonite, garner a friendship with the Mandalorians, keep Vader alive, and generally allow the rebellion to have a cleaner victory. Luke himself is privy to many more secrets in the Force here, and would be much more powerful than he already was in the original timeline. From here, most challenges he faces are a wash until he gets to Abeloth. I think this is also a product of Luke just being able to get more training in. He got an accumulated month of training between Yoda and Obi-Wan together in the original timeline, though with Revan being a Force Ghost, he is able to follow Luke around, to keep his training up no matter where he goes. This adds a lot of depth to Luke's training, a greater understanding of what the dark side is, not simply to avoid it at all costs, but to understand it. This is the main difference with Revan being Luke's Jedi Master here, a true and a complete comprehension and understanding of both sides of the Force, and their relationship with each other. But now, what do you think, my friend? Do you believe the timeline would have gone differently? Let us know what you personally think would happen to Luke if he was trained by Revan. Also, if you're interested, be sure to apply to the editor position using the information in the description down below. But until next time, my friends, if you enjoy these more hypothetical videos, comment what other changes in the timeline you would want to see explored down below. As always, thank you for your time, your patience, and your support, and may the Force be with you.